I like comic books. Nobody's shocked when I say that. But I do. I very sincerely do. I like reading them, and if given the opportunity, I will talk about them for hours on end. People often ask me, how do you get into comic books? Well, they don't ask me that often. Most of the time they smile and politely nod as I list a string of Batman facts. But every once in a while, I get this question: where do you start with comic books? Because comic books have a lot of history, a lot of extensive lore, and a lot of backstory. To fully understand sometimes comic, you have to read through 3 or 4 years of material. Where do you start with things like Batman or Superman? Just start with the latest one. What's the new issue? Just start reading that. I know that feels contradictory, and people who would maybe want to get into it would say, well, I would miss the references, I would miss the lore. You don't need to. The thing about superhero comics is they're not as original as some people like to say, and they're not as lore heavy as maybe even comic writers believe. If you have a good grasp of who the character is, and you being interested in reading a comic book, you probably have a pretty good understanding of who the character is. You don't need much more than that to jump into any storyline that seems interesting. Just look through, you know, what you want to read, and you'll find something that sticks out to you, and just read that, and you'll get it pretty quickly. It's kind of like life, isn't it, if you really think about it? Everybody you meet, including your friends and family, you never really know the full story of their lives. You can get a pretty good sense of it, but you'll never know the totality of a person because people don't know the totality of themselves. You come in the middle of everyone's story. Yet, our friends, our family, people we've met halfway through our lives can become very important. They become deep and lifelong friends. And we're okay with that. We accept on an implicit level that part of their lives will always be a mystery to us. We embrace the mystery. And I think that's how you have to approach comic books. Embrace that you will never totally know what's going on. You may not know every single one of Batman's stories, but you can get a good sense of Batman by reading the stuff that interests you. My real advice is this. Pick a run. What you're going to want to do is you're going to look for runs of different teams who are working on it. Pick one that seems interesting and just read that. Another element to these stories is there are thousands of Batman comics and thousands of Superman comics. And hundreds of writers have written these characters. And the truth of the matter is, despite how uniform they attempt to keep it, they can't. And every single interpretation is just a little bit different from every other interpretation. You'll never read the exact same character in any story. There are 1,000 Batman and 1,000 Superman. But if you really want my advice, Batman, The Longest Halloween is probably a good start.